Michael, you are making us guilty for not having more time, but that's the only thing we cannot control. Indeed, such a fascinating discussion with beautiful minds in this panel. But trust me, we have so many of these coming up next as part of Webit's economic sustainers. Let me remind you, hashtag Webit is our open discussion. And of course, the most important part is using our platform powered by TVS, where you can freely and openly express ideas, ask questions, and be part of the solutions for the better desirable future and the impact we all as a community could and should have for reaching goal 2030 and building the better future. Our next participants are one of the finest in when we talk about economics. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the next panel, which will focus on sustainability powered by technology innovation. And hopefully this will be the future of business. And I believe one of the best moderators for this panel is Miss Inga Thordar, who will introduce herself and the panel. Inga, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Inga Thordar. I'm the executive editor for CNN Digital internationally. It's my pleasure to be here today with a very distinctive panel to discuss a critical issue, sustainability in business. A recent landmark report from global scientists said the Earth is warming faster than previously thought. It is careering towards a 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is a threshold that world leaders agreed to stay below. The UN called the report a code red for humanity. Experts agree that the only way to reach a sustainable solution for our planet is for businesses, governments, and consumers to play their part. In isolation, these three areas are unlikely to succeed. So today we'll be focusing on businesses, but I am very interested to hear from panelists about the interaction between these three key players. Most businesses in the world have become very aware of their responsibilities around sustainability and have either started their journey towards a greener and more circular economy or are in the process of doing so. But how effective is it really? The word greenwashing is already being used regularly, hinting that companies are more talk than actions. Many companies also say that transition is going to require investments on a huge scale for an extended period of time, so companies' profits could be hit. So we will discuss the profitability of the green economy and if that's even a question to raise given the state of the planet. And finally, technology could provide some solution, and there are already many smart inventions out there that can make our habits greener. We will look into what they are and how they can do more than just clean up after our bad habits, but also create new ones that are good for the planet. And those habits are hopefully good for business too. So let me introduce our expert panelists. Sir Martin Sorrell is the founder and executive chairman at S4 Capital, which is building an innovative, purely digital advertising and marketing services business for global, regional, and local clients, as well as millennial-driven influencer brands. And Vivek Bapat is the senior vice president, purpose and sustainability marketing at SAP, and is a recognized global thought leader on topics of marketing, technology, and personal growth. He is also a contributor to 13 global patents in the technology industry and a co-author of 2 business books. So welcome to both of you. And let me just begin with quite a broad question. Maybe, Sir Martin, starting with you, why does business really matter in our collective challenge to deliver a sustainable economy?
Well, because it's a key driver of jobs. And I think, we look at purpose maybe a little bit differently. When I say business is a key driver of jobs, obviously we're heavily involved. We'll get into this later. We're heavily involved in sustainability. Most of our clients, the tech platforms, the hardware companies, the software companies like SAP are intimately involved in sustainability. We ourselves as a company are committed to going zero by 2024. We've signed the Amazon Climate Pledge. We've signed the World Economic Forum Pledge. We've signed up to the UN goals. We've done all that. But, I just want to take a step back and sort of give you my personal sort of definition of sustainability. And I think it's around jobs. I mean, you ask why business is important in the sustainability world, or in the area of sustainability. It's because we provide jobs. We are the engine of the economy and employment, particularly, actually, interestingly, the small and medium-sized businesses, which are often the entrepreneurial businesses, which are often even bigger engines, would you believe, than the larger companies. And when I look at the growth of technology, there are two camps, obviously, with the growth of technology in relation to unemployment. Some believe that with advances in technology, you create employment. Some believe that you destroy employment. I don't want to sound negative, but I tend, despite the fact that our business is totally focused on digital, I tend to side with the second group, that inevitably technology will diminish job opportunities. And therefore, I see our role at S4 and at Media Monks, our unitary operating brand, as to increase the opportunities for employment, not just in the countries where our talent resides. We have about 6,500 people in 33 countries, but everywhere. So, for example, during the pandemic, when obviously employment was under severe threat, despite the fiscal and monetary stimulus that governments all around the world quite rightly infused into the economy, we grew from about 2,500 people to 6,500 people. We did that, it is true, by merging with a number of businesses, but the organic growth rate was about, in the first half of this year, was 50%, last year was 20%. So we grew very strongly despite the pandemic, basically because our business is a digital business, and created employment opportunities. And when we talk about sustainability, I think that is one of the areas that people ignore. They go for the more obvious. We're probably a little bit less obvious, although we do embrace as an organization and for our work for our clients on the more normal areas of putting in inverted commas of sustainability.
Vivek?
Yeah, so first of all, it's an honor and privilege to share the stage with Sir Martin Sorrell and you, Inga. Appreciate the dialogue. And I'd maybe just pick up on a few things that were mentioned earlier, which is that sustainability tends to be equated mostly with environmental aspects. And I think it's important that we broaden the understanding of what this term is. And for me, sustainability really sits at the intersection of economic, social, and environmental issues. And so it's really, we have to look at all of these topics as interrelated topics and not just within the confines of, one particular activity. The other thing I would say is that, for decades now, business has been the cause, but also can be the solution on this particular issue. So just to give you a sense of one particular topic that everybody's talking about, which is around climate action, we all know that, we have to get into reductions of emissions, for instance, at a rate that is, it's going to be hard to keep up with. So we all know the issue, but if you just look at some of the science, and if you just look at, for instance, the concentrations of carbon dioxide that we are at now, we're at roughly twice the concentration of CO2 that we were, just before, just in the early parts of the 19th century. The last time we were at this level of concentration, sea levels were several meters high, and there were trees growing in the South Pole. So I think there's sort of the awareness of the problem is happening. I think in terms of why business should play such a central role, well, if you just consider the fact that just 100 companies today are responsible for 71% of the world's emissions. Only 8% of the materials that flow across these complicated supply chains are reusable or recycled. And then we, of course, have lots of issues, I think, which were brought up earlier around employment, around gender equality, and so on and so forth. So all of these issues, to me, form the basis and the fabric of sustainability. But at the end of the day, what we are trying to do here is to really frame this as a resource constraint problem. So ultimately, this is, a resource constraint problem. It's within the confines of, what we would typically refer to as planetary resources. And so that's really where the discussion ought to be. And we can talk a lot more about technology and some of the enabling opportunities for us as we move forward.
Yeah, just to add to that, Vivek, I mean, actually, I think is the way you framed it was very good when you talked about, sustainability, the sort of the crossing point of economy, social, and environment. One of the things we tend to forget, I just talking directly from experience through the pandemic, one of the things that we're starting to see, I mean, if you said, what are the list of the things that we worry about, are those people who are trying to run a business in one way, shape, or form? Well, we're worried about the inequalities caused by globalization. We're worried about climate change. We're worried about, obviously, the pandemic. We're worried about DE&I, which I'll come back to. We're worried about Brexit. Those we're worried about US-China relations. And one of the things we've seen in the pandemic is really interesting, and it followed the murder of George Floyd. What we've started to see, and I think the principal driver, to Vivek's point, was business through procurement policies. What we've started to see that diversity, for example, in our business, when we pitched recently for a tech platforms business, which we won because we are 40% people of color, not enough, let's say, in the Black community, we're only about 6 or 7 in America. We should be 13% at least for the average for the country and 25% on the East Coast. But we're very strong in Hispanic and Asian American. And we won that business because the procurement department of the tech company or the marketing department, 40% of the grade was on diversity of the team. So business can be a tremendous enabler as long as we get our act together. And what we've seen is people talk about inflation in salaries. Where we are seeing significant hikes, which is a leveling up and is needed, is in those groups that I mentioned and on gender. I mean, we're starting to see in America, the media companies and the tech companies start to take a much more aggressive attitude to gender parity and diversity. And I think, business, it's a very good example, I think, of how business can enable. I mean, it took a terrible event like George Floyd and other terrible events to stimulate it, but it is having an impact.
You can also see that in recruitment when new people coming in are asking about those policies when you're hiring. So to that point, the ESG reports that companies now do you see that increasing in significance? I mean, most of the time we talk about annual financial reports from companies. Is the ESG going to rival that in the next year or so? Vivek, maybe.
I think it would. Right. Yeah, Vivek. Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, I think there's a number of different things that need to fall into place for us to realize some of the ambitions that companies have set up. And so I think, every day when you turn to the news, there's a set of companies that have signed up for some of these ambitious goals, particularly around carbon neutrality. And so there's some lofty ambitions in place, but a lot of companies actually don't really understand or know how to activate their business in order to realize those ambitions. So there's a huge gap at the moment in terms of the difference between aspiration and activation. And I think the bigger the gap between aspiration and activation, that's when you get into sort of the point of greenwashing. And so I think what's happening is that almost 70% of the companies that have signed up to these types of pledges really don't have a good idea on where they stand on these particular issues today. So I think ESG reporting is one fundamental pillar of being able to help companies or prod companies in order to move in the right direction. The challenge is many companies just don't know how to do that. Now, the question that you asked was, should companies be held to the same level of standard and rigor that they are held to financial reports? I believe that the answer is absolutely yes, because until that happens, until you have a situation where public companies report their earnings every quarter, and the investors are asking them sort of the questions around profitability, growth, all of the metrics that have been really important to the financial community. Until we have the same rigor of analysis quarter by quarter on companies' performance, I don't think much is going to change in terms of closing this gap that I talked about earlier between aspiration and activation.
Yeah, I think actually the question about ESG reporting, I mean, it has become really very important for a similar reason as the leveling up that I mentioned in relation to D and E and I. And it's being driven in this case, not by procurement, but it's sort of like investment procurement, because investors, you've seen I don't know the figures, but you've seen the massive surge of money, of flow of money into ESG funds, the massive increase, and it is very significant increase in people being concerned about ESG policies. And what's happening is every company, and I've experienced it myself in our roadshows. I mean, there is a difference, it is true, between the fund managers and the governance people, but increasingly the fund managers, which is one of the two verticals inside the asset manager, are asking for performance in DE&I, in environment, and the other areas that Vivek touched on. So I think it has actually become essential. We're fortunate because we have a dual class structure, and Vivek referred to quarterly reporting. We do quarterly reporting, but if we make a mistake, we're not well, we are worried about obviously making mistakes, but we're not worried about getting kicked out because we have to some extent control of our destiny, and we can make long-term decisions. I mean, one of the things in your forward, Inga, you said sustainability is a long-term exercise and you may have short-term costs. If we believe that our clients think ESG work is important and purpose is important, which they do, and our people, as a means of attracting talent, our people do too. And, our 6,500 people on average are around about 28, 29, 30, 31, that sort of, so they are vitally interested. For example, there's a recent big issue that came up in America affecting women, caused huge concerns amongst women, our female employees in America. And we have to respond to that. I mean, we can't sit here. We will not be an attractive destination for strong female talent unless we take up these causes, if our workforce, our people believe that something is wrong. So in a way, ESG it's like the procurement example on DE&I. We are being driven, businesses are being driven, whether they like it or not, down the ESG road, because there will be institutions that won't invest if smoke is bulging out of your chimneys, or if you're not treating minority groups in the right way, or women, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned the consumer, you mentioned the talent. What about governments here? I mean, if we continue with this sort of comparison between financial reporting, they are heavily regulated. They are mandatory in many ways. Do we think that companies will need that kind of push from governments for that area also to become heavily regulated, for companies to really, go from that phase, which I really like saying, into the activation phase? Do governments need to be more active around regulation, or is that a hindrance? So Martin.
Well, not about regulation. I would say government can do a hell of a lot on procurement. So for example, now I'm not sure, this is not a good example. Well, maybe it is, right? The Beijing Olympics, the Winter Olympics in February, the human rights issues with the Uyghurs in China. I think I'm right in saying the Democrats invited the sponsors, the top sponsors of the Olympic Games. They sponsor it on quads. I don't think Vivek, SAP are a sponsor, are they? An IOC sponsor? Anyway, they invited the IOC sponsors to Congress, the Democrats, and apparently said, I'm told, that if those companies appeared at Beijing in February, they would be denied access to government contracts. So I see, I mean, it's carrot or stick that you're talking about. Regulation, yes, in a sense, but I think there should be intervention by government to achieve social gains. That's probably, the US-China issue is a very tender issue and a very difficult issue. But I think on procurement, there is no doubt. I mean, the American government has, when I was at WPP, I mean, if we used minority-controlled agencies on programs, I think there was a procurement point system that we got brownie points, if I can put it like that, for using minority-owned. And this was to encourage the growth of minority, and those groups are now the majority in America, if you look at the census. But it really to stimulate. So I think government is really important. So you've got sort of like commercial procurement pushing, like in the E&I case, you've got government procurement pushing, and you've got sort of investors pushing. So it sounds a bit draconian, but I think that's the way to get it done. You can set quotas, you can set targets, and that is having an effect. But if you want to get things done quickly, there's nothing in our industry that stimulates people more quickly than one of the major criteria being diversity of a team or whatever, in order to get to first base. I mean, forget about hitting a home run. Just to get on base, you have to do that.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just touch on one quick point here, and then Inga, I'd like to come back to your question of regulations. So on the procurement side, one of the advantages and one of the things that we can do with technology is actually provide social enterprises, whether they are minority-owned, women-owned, and so on and so forth. We can provide those types of entities that typically have not had the resources to get into the global commerce arena. We can provide and we can make those companies and entities more visible into the global procurement space. So this is one of the things that we are doing, within some of our technologies related to procurement. SAP, fortunately, we're in a privileged position where we are behind 87% of the world's procurement and commerce activities. So literally trillions of dollars and euros flowing through the system every day. And so we're working and we're doing our part to be able to encourage many of these companies who are behind these procurement cases to be able to procure from socially responsible businesses. Now, coming back to your question on regulations, I think regulations can be both a net positive and it can be a hindrance as well. So I think it's a little bit like the analogy is it's like cholesterol. And I think on the positive side, if you look at government regulations, they mostly still, I know that there's the Paris Agreement that is basically putting, some pressure on governments to have regulations on the carbon aspect. But if you think about it, you can do a lot with nations imposing certain types of regulations. But if you look at modern business today, business is flowing across these nations. Right, that's just the nature of the interconnected supply chains that we run. And so if there is regulation, for instance, that enables businesses to look at both, it rewards the players who are contributing a net positive to the economy, to social factors, and to the environment. And it actually penalizes some of the companies that are not. But it also provides a way for companies to be able to do things like carbon trading, for instance. This is something where many industries that are going to take decades to change potentially can look at trading as one of the vehicles of a solution. So I think there are lots of things that regulations can put into place. I think we need sort of a completely new thinking around the infrastructure around these types of topics that companies can basically source from. So it's a powerful.
I would just add.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I would just add to that, Vivek and Inga. I think government in the UK, for example, the new business minister, the first thing he did when he came in, Kwasi Kwarteng, and obviously he's got a lot of big issues around natural gas and oil and HGV drivers to deal with currently. But his first move was to, and I don't think, to be fair, it was his initiation. He just implemented, I think it was a 200-page report on audit and fraud reform, or fraud law reform. Now, that was needed. And it was important, and nobody's denying the importance of that. But the timing of it, when we have to think about the things that Vivek went through, the things we're discussing on this call, and all the other things, globalization and its negative effects and climate change and everything else, to have this sort of landed on top, I think is unhelpful. If it's well-directed reform and it's sort of a rifle shot rather than a blunderbuss, I think it can be extremely effective. And using the levers of government from a purchasing point of view, I hate to use the word procurement again, but I mean, it is really setting out the conditions for the award of contracts and business. I think that's the way that you really get change very, very quickly. And I think we've seen that in the last sort of 16, 18 months through the pandemic.
Yeah. Vivek, I was very interested in that in your job title, you have the word purpose. I don't think I've seen that sort of before. And I'm sort of curious about why that is important. Why do you think that purpose, and what is the role of that in providing sort of a guide to sort of decision making? And I mean, maybe this is a difficult question, but what do you see as the purpose of SAP?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And I think, so let me just try to give you a little bit of a background here. So the purpose of SAP is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. That is the stated purpose, and we've been at it for the last 52 years. Now, how do we do that? Number one, we focus on our own businesses, and we basically try to live out the principles and values as exemplars of purpose and sustainability. So what can we do, for instance, to ensure that we are a carbon neutral business? What can we do to make sure that we have the right diversity, agenda in terms of our hiring practices? How do we enable social procurement like Sir Sorrell just, talked to? So there are a number of different things that we do as related to being an exemplar of purpose. And then where we see a disproportionate amount of influence is through the work that we can do with more than 400,000 customers around the world in 180 countries, where we can help support their ambitions and their purpose agenda as well. And the way that we do that is through our products, our partnerships, our programs, and our people. So this is sort of the frame through which we look at it. I've been often asked the question, well, what's the difference between purpose and sustainability? How do these things combine, and why do you have this in your title? So in my mind, there's a simple answer, which is purpose is really why your brand or your company exists. It's the rallying cry that brings together your stakeholders, your employees, your customers in service of a common cause. And purpose has been around for many, many, many years, and many companies are invested in this. Sustainability, on the other hand, is really the activation of that purpose in that business context. And so in my role, we are both focused on, ensuring and making sure that we stay authentic to our purpose, which is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. At the same time, as enablers, we are creating the solutions and the framework and partnerships in order to help our customers, where we can actually have an outsized impact on delivering some of the ideas around economic environment as well as social responsibility.
That's really interesting. So Martin, I want to get to the consumers here, and I mean that's obviously
just before we've got time, just take a slightly different view. I mean, I said our purpose is around creating job opportunities in a digital world, and just to Vivek's point, I sort of shy away from the purpose, sustainability sort of definitions. Mission statements tend to look very similar. You go to the World Economic Forum we were talking to earlier today, make the world a better place. And a lot of what you hear in purpose is a variation on that. My view is, and this goes back maybe to the Chicago Monetary School, which is a little bit naughty, but it's to modify Milton Friedman. It's not short term, but it's not to maximize the profitability of the firm. It's to maximize the long-term profitability of the firm. And if you think about it from a long-term point of view, everything fits into place, because you will not destroy, if you're an oil company or energy company, you will not destroy the environment if you're interested in long term. If you want to just get the oil out of the ground as quickly as possible and sell it in the shortest possible period of time and make the profit, you will. But if you're in it for the long term, that, to my mind, is modified. This is not, I wouldn't claim authorship of this. This is John Brown at BP in 1997 at Stanford Business School. And I really think it's important because I think we overcomplicate this. It's about the long, if our people are concerned about something in America affecting women and we don't do something about it, we won't get the opportunity to hire good people. So if we're interested in the long-term viability of our firm and profitability, we will do it. So I think that's what I think we just overcomplicated things. And the other point I'd make, private equity has become a huge player in the economy. And if you look at probably, I don't know the figures, it's very difficult to say what do they represent of the economy, let's say in the US or the UK, and it's getting much bigger in the UK at the moment because of low valuations in the stock market. But let's say it's about 15%, 20%, maybe 15%. The proportion of deals that are being done by private equity is much higher. And listed companies are buying back their stock, particularly in the US, and that's been a big drive, and the listed sector is diminishing. So coming back to purpose and long-term profitability, private equity's profitability horizon is probably around 4 or 5 years, probably shortened because interest rates have been so low. It's been shortened to about 3 or 4 years. This, I think, is a real problem. And when government policy doesn't tax the carry at income tax rates, so it makes it highly profitable for individuals as a benefit of their employment to get the carry, I think that that raises issues. So the private equity area, which is by definition private and out of public view, gets much more play as a result. Coal plants, right? Out of favor, people selling coal plants. Who do they sell them to, right? So I think it's about long-termism, and it's about trying, in an era of short-term interest rate, of low interest rates, and that is obviously going to change, but I don't know by how much. Low interest rates, it's been very easy for private equity to expand, and they are not controlled to the degree that listed companies are. They are not put under the microscope that S4 is, or even more obviously SAP, because of its size and success.
I love that definition, by the way. I think that's a really nice way of looking at it.
Yeah. I think you see everything fits into place when you talk about the long term. And we've been, we're no different to you. We're much smaller, but we're no different to you in that we are focused on quarterly results. The difference, to be blunt, between S4 where we have a control share and WPP where we didn't, was we know if we make a mistake at S4, and you should make mistakes. I mean, everything shouldn't be perfect, really. Otherwise, you don't take sufficient risk, I think. But we know we're not going to get kicked out. So I think taking the long-term view. I mean, like we invest in the first half of this year and the first half of the last 2 years, we've invested heavily in talent because we knew that the second half of the year was going to be stronger. Our margins in the first half were lower. The margins in the second half were much stronger. I mean, that's a smaller example. But I think taking the long-term view is really important.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And I mean, I think actually, if you look at the behavior of consumers, and I know, Sir Martin, you've got a lot of experience around that, but I have 2 teenagers at home who always check where their clothes are coming from and what they're buying and where their brands are. And that was something that wouldn't even have occurred to me back in the day. So I'm wondering we've talked about what the governments can do and where businesses are, but businesses are going to be affected if they're going to start being, with consumers move away from them, even, going as far as boycotts. Do you see, that trend continuing and getting more, that consumers will just say, I won't buy from you if you're unethical?
Yes, I think, and I think it's true, Vivek, in the area of suppliers as well. Yeah. You won't use suppliers that share your values. If you're hiring an advertising agency and you or whatever, you will you'll apply those standards. Yeah. So yes, yeah. And I think consumers will be very unforgiving, increasingly unforgiving because for the obvious reason, I mean, social media, we all know that, reputations can be destroyed in a nanosecond. And so, and you have to respond very quickly to those changes and be very cognizant of those changes. And, whether we've become more ethical or moral or focused on, or whether it's because that's been created, I don't think it has been created by new media, but it's certainly been accelerated, right? It's I don't think a lot of things that happened in the 1950s and 60s and 70s politically, if they happened today, the reception by the population would be very, very different because of social media. So it's accelerated the take up, and I mean, we're all very cautious about the implications of any move we make in terms of their impact on consumers. And I would say two communities: consumers and people. The people in our company determine who we work for. We have decided not to work for certain sectors or certain companies in those sectors because our people, to be blunt, refuse to work on them. So it doesn't matter what we think, let's say at the so-called top of the firm, if our people, and I said, our people are digital natives. These are people who've been schooled. These are Silicon Valley people in Amsterdam in the content industry, Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Tokyo, Singapore, Shanghai, Beijing. I mean, these are young people right on the cutting edge. And if they think that the company that we're talking about working for doesn't share our values or what they interpret as our values, they won't work for them. And we have a problem. So you're going to see more of that. You're going to see more of that.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of time left. So I just wanted to move on a little bit to technology, because obviously we wanted to talk about how that can help businesses. And Vivek, I know that, obviously you're in a prime position to talk about that. But it was interesting, you said earlier that technology is not the only solution and not, what we should just be looking to. But what have you seen that, and what is your with your background, where do you see technology playing a part here around sustainability?
Sure. And I think, COVID to a certain extent proved out the value of technology when it comes to moments of crisis. So whether it was bringing people together in terms of remote work, whether it was ensuring that there was resiliency in some of the global supply chains and maintaining mission critical, activities, I think technology was clearly a catalyst in making that happen. And to a certain extent, what we found was that our customers who had really invested significantly in digitizing their businesses actually came out of the crisis faster and better. Now, when it comes to technology and sustainability, what we see is a couple of different types of problems and the complicated nature of, the addressing the how that we talked about earlier. How do we actually become sustainable? Not just talk about our ambitions. There are two essential problems. The first is data, just access to data. And even in the case of carbon emissions, for instance, 85% of the emissions are sitting outside of a company's core operations. So how do companies actually get access to that data if they're going to actually make an impact in terms of reducing their carbon footprint? The second one is how do they bring sustainability into the core of their business instead of running this as a side activity. And so I think it's a combination of making sure that they have access to all of the data, whether it's within their business, whether it's across their extended supply chains. So in the case of a consumer goods company, for instance, it's important for them to know sources of water. It's important to know agricultural resources, where they might reside, where are some of the best options. So you can just go down the line. Technology is able to help gather that data and provide insights on the basis of that data so that companies can make key resource allocation decisions. The second one is actually influencing the core. I think Sir Martin talked about it really eloquently earlier, which is just looking at a process like procurement, for instance, and making sure that you're sourcing from the right suppliers across transnational boundaries. That in itself, if you can do that at scale, which is what technology allows you to do, it can actually have a massive impact in terms of solving these types of problems. And there are lots of different examples. Our focus has primarily been on the end-to-end supply chain in terms of manufacturing, sourcing, procurement, and reporting as well. So we are helping, CFOs, for instance, report the current state of their business when it comes to ESG and governance. So I'll stop there because I know we're going to run out of time, but there's technology is really one of the catalysts to be able to provide these types of solutions at the urgency that is needed and at scale.
Yeah.
And agree that I think the acid test, Inga, Vivek, is when these policies hurt your pocket. I mean, I won't name names, but I can think of one major packaged goods company that made sort of big point of principle around purpose and only producing products for purpose, and then had one of their products in one of the countries in the world which was a significant seller, and that's when it's tough, because then it has to be really authentic, and you have to take the pain. There are agencies in our industry, in the traditional industry, that talk about purpose continuously. Almost every day there's another PR release. If you look at their client list, there are clients on there that most of their employees have problems about working for. And so it comes back to, I think, what you're going to see, coming back to one of your previous questions, you're going to see people inside your company and consumers play an extremely strong role in all that.
So I'm going to end up by asking you to look into your crystal ball here. And in 30 seconds, give me what you think are the predictions for the future of your industry. Vivek, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think, I think what we will continue to do is to look at various ways of servicing our customers. And clearly for this particular issue, what we see is that the traditional rules of competition within the industry, where we might be competing for a certain type of business, I think those are going to ultimately dissolve. And so if you put it from a customer's perspective, the customer is looking for multiple types of solutions. Many of these technology companies are great at providing sort of niche solutions in specific domains. I think what we will look at is this industry coming together as a whole in terms of providing sort of the end-to-end solutions that many of these companies that we've discussed about today will need.
Thank you, Vivek. So Martin?
Two tailwinds. I mean, I don't know what period you're talking over, but digital is 55% of media spend, marketing services spend, and trade budgets, which total up to about 1.7, 1.8 trillion a year. And digital is about 55% of that already. It will be 70, 75% by 24, 25, and the industry going at 20%. So the digital transformation tailwind is huge. For 21 and 22, we've had a GDP tailwind driven by fiscal and monetary stimulus. That will taper out, to use the term properly. That'll taper out next year into 23. The rubber hits the road in 23. I think things get tough in 23 from a GDP point of view. It goes back to pre-pandemic levels of 2 to 3% rather than 5 to 6 this year and 4 to 5 next year. But at that time, SAB's business will become even more important because people will be focusing even more on digital transformation.
Well, I want to thank you both for an absolutely enlightening conversation, and I hope that I'll be looking to see if your predictions come true. I also want to thank you both for raising a wider diversity as part of this conversation, because it can often get forgotten. So I appreciate the wide-ranging topics you touched on. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Inga. Thank you. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you.
Thanks so much.